Right, listen here. A valuation of $56 billion on day one sounds absolutely mental until you discover what's really happening behind the scenes. This design software is secretly powering virtually every digital product you interact with daily, from Netflix's interface to Amazon's checkout pages. And when you're charging millions of companies worldwide for something they absolutely cannot function without, those eye-watering valuations suddenly start making perfect sense. Walk into any tech company office today, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, any of them, and ask the designers and developers what tools they use to build the digital products you interact with every single day. 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you about something called Figma, a simple design tool that's become as essential to creating digital products as Microsoft Word is to writing documents. Ask anyone outside the tech world what Figma is, though, and you'll get blank stares. Your uncle who runs a small business, never heard of it. Your mate who works in finance, hasn't got a clue. Even most business journalists covering the tech industry would struggle to explain what collaborative design software actually does or why anyone should care about it. This creates one of the most fascinating disconnects in modern business. 13 million people use Figma every month. 95% of Fortune 500 companies depend on it to design their digital products. It's generated nearly $1 billion in annual revenue, with profit margins that would make most CEOs weep with envy. Yet somehow, it's remained practically invisible to mainstream business coverage. Now, I'll admit something rather embarrassing. I knew Figma existed, hard to miss when you're researching tech companies for a living. But I'd completely underestimated how this quiet design tool had somehow become more essential to modern business than most software people actually recognize. Whilst the business media obsesses over whatever drama is happening at social media companies or cryptocurrency exchanges, millions of professionals have quietly built their entire careers around software that never bothers with flashy marketing campaigns. The invisibility becomes even more remarkable when you consider the money involved. When Figma went public, ordinary investors on Robinhood who requested 300 shares got exactly 1 share each, 1 bloody share, whilst institutional investors frantically scrambled to understand what this company actually does. People were desperately trying to buy stock in a business they couldn't explain to their own families, and as we'll discover later, what happened to those Robinhood users reveals something rather troubling about how these IPO allocations actually work. This isn't just another tech success story. This is the tale of how an entire generation of digital professionals quietly adopted revolutionary software, whilst the rest of the world remained completely oblivious to a transformation happening right under our noses. How 2 college dropouts built something so fundamentally better than existing tools that Adobe, bloody Adobe, tried to spend $20 billion just to make the competitive threat disappear. This story reveals something fascinating about modern business. The most valuable companies today might be the ones that solve essential problems for specific professional communities, whilst remaining completely unknown to the general public. They're not trying to be household names, they're trying to be indispensable to the people who actually build the digital world the rest of us live in. Now, before we dive into this tale of the most successful invisible takeover in modern business history, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. You'll want to stick around for more stories about revolutionary companies that somehow changed the world, whilst most of us were busy watching whatever nonsense was making headlines elsewhere. What makes design software worth $56 billion when most people have never heard of it? The answer reveals how technology has evolved and why companies that matter most today aren't making headlines. Figma represents something entirely different from the tech giants we're used to hearing about. While Oracle builds labyrinthine enterprise software requiring armies of consultants, Figma built something designers could use in 5 minutes. Microsoft creates bloated interfaces packed with features nobody asked for. Figma obsesses over making every interaction feel effortless. LinkedIn clutters screens with notifications. Figma provides clean canvases and gets out of your way. The philosophical difference is crucial. Old tech companies followed a simple playbook: build features first, figure out user experience later. Add complexity, then charge customers for training to navigate that complexity. Create dependency through difficulty rather than delight. Figma's generation does the opposite. They start with user experience and work backwards. Every feature has to make collaboration easier, not just add functionality. If something doesn't improve daily workflows, it doesn't get built. The difference is staggering in action. Traditional design software forces designers to work in isolation, then email files back and forth, creating version control nightmares. Figma lets entire teams work on the same design simultaneously, seeing changes in real time, commenting directly on specific elements. This created a fascinating knowledge divide. Walk through any Fortune 500 company, and you'll find design teams, product managers, and developers whose entire workflows center around Figma. 95% of Fortune 500 companies depend on it for digital product design. Your banking apps, e-commerce checkouts, streaming interfaces. Yet business journalists can't explain what collaborative design software does or why it matters. The disconnect created something remarkable, a massive blind spot where informed users could see enormous value that markets completely missed. Designers and developers immediately recognized Figma's revolutionary potential because they lived the pain of legacy tools daily. They knew this wasn't just better software, it was fundamentally different software. Dylan Field and Evan Wallace founded the company in 2012 as Brown University computer science students, representing this new generation of builders. Field had grown frustrated by expensive, clunky design software that seemed designed to make simple tasks complicated. Wallace understood web-native architecture in ways desktop-first companies couldn't match. Their vision seemed impossible. Real-time collaboration in complex design software running smoothly in web browsers. Legacy companies like Adobe had built entire architectures around desktop applications and individual users. They literally couldn't build what Figma envisioned without starting from scratch. Field received a Peter Thiel Fellowship, $234,000 to drop out and focus on utility-first design. This wasn't just funding, it was validation of a completely different approach. While established companies worried about enterprise sales cycles, Field and Wallace focused on creating something people would genuinely love using. Dylan Field arrived at Brown University in 2009 with a problem millions of students faced, but few tried to solve. Design software was bloody expensive and absolutely dreadful to use. Adobe Creative Suite cost hundreds while requiring powerful computers most students couldn't afford. But Field wasn't just complaining, he was calculating. Design tools were stuck in 1990s desktop thinking, while everything else moved toward cloud collaboration. Every other type of software was becoming web-based and accessible from anywhere. Yet designers were still trapped in isolated desktop applications, emailing files back and forth like it was the Stone Age. Instead of asking, "How can we add features?" Field asked, "What would design software look like if we built it today?" That's when he met Evan Wallace, a technical genius who understood something crucial. Web-native architecture could do things desktop software simply couldn't match. Wallace had the engineering skills to make complex design tools feel simple and fast in browsers, a combination legacy companies struggled to achieve with decades of development. Their philosophical approach was radical. Start with user experience rather than technical capabilities. Most software companies begin with what's technically possible, then figure out how to make it usable. Field and Wallace flipped this completely around, starting with how people actually wanted to work. Early experiments proved this approach worked. They built drone software, meme generators, and various browser-based creative tools, learning what felt natural and what felt forced. Each project taught them more about making complex functionality. The pivot to collaborative graphics came from recognizing design wasn't individual work anymore. Modern digital products required input from designers, developers, product managers, marketers, and executives. Yet existing tools forced everyone to work in isolation, creating endless friction. Figma's $4 million seed round in 2013 came from investors who didn't fully understand the vision, but recognized the technical achievement. Living on investment money meant different priorities than established companies. No flashy offices, no expensive marketing campaigns, just obsessive focus on building something genuinely better. The technical challenge was immense. Making complex design tools feel simple in browsers required innovations that didn't exist yet. Every interaction had to be optimized. Every feature had to improve collaboration rather than just adding functionality. The difference between good enough and genuinely delightful determined whether users would adopt or abandon the platform. December 2015 marked the first public validation. The invite-only preview revealed clean, intuitive interfaces that felt immediately familiar to anyone who'd struggled with Adobe's cluttered complexity. Early users weren't just impressed by technology. They were relieved to find design software that actually made sense. September 2016 brought the public launch, showing what new generation software could accomplish. Instead of overwhelming users with options, Figma provided exactly what teams needed to collaborate effectively. Instead of requiring extensive training, it felt intuitive from the first session. Early adopters weren't random. They were forward-thinking designers and startups tired of legacy tool frustrations. These users became evangelists not because of marketing campaigns, but because Figma genuinely improved their daily work experience. Word-of-mouth growth driven by user delight proved more powerful than traditional advertising. By 2016, something remarkable was happening in design teams worldwide, but almost nobody outside those teams noticed. Figma was spreading through professional networks like wildfire, creating passionate advocates who couldn't stop talking about how it had transformed their daily work. The growth felt different from typical software adoption. Instead of top-down enterprise purchasing decisions or flashy marketing campaigns, Figma grew through genuine word-of-mouth from people who actually used it. Designers would share their screens in meetings, colleagues would see real-time collaboration happening, and suddenly, entire teams wanted access to this magical software. But here's what made this fascinating. While millions of professionals were building careers around Figma, business analysts and investors remained largely oblivious. The knowledge gap was staggering. People using the software daily could see enormous value that Wall Street completely missed. Funding rounds told part of the story. Series A brought $14 million in 2015. Series B added $25 million in 2018. Series C contributed $40 million in 2019. Steady growth, respectable numbers, but nothing screaming revolutionary company to investors focused on consumer apps and enterprise sales metrics. What users knew that investors didn't was simple. This wasn't just better software. It was fundamentally different software. The experience of collaborating in real time on complex design projects felt like magic compared to the email and pray approach of legacy tools. Once teams experienced seamless collaboration, going back to individual desktop applications felt primitive. October 2019 brought a crucial milestone that revealed Figma's true power: the launch of Figma Community. This wasn't just a feature. It was proof that users had become passionate evangelists willing to create and share resources for free. When software users start building communities around your product without being asked, you've achieved something special. The freemium model worked brilliantly because it let teams experience the transformation before asking for money. Users could feel the difference immediately: the smoothness of browser-based editing, the joy of seeing colleagues' cursors moving in real time, the relief of never worrying about version control again. Converting from free to professional tier at $12 per month felt natural rather than forced. Professional workflows were being rebuilt around Figma's collaborative capabilities. Design teams stopped working in isolation and started involving developers, product managers, and stakeholders directly in the creative process. The software hadn't just improved efficiency, it had changed how entire companies approached digital product development. The 2020 Series D valued Figma at $2 billion, a significant milestone that finally caught some market attention. But anyone using Figma daily knew this valuation was still conservative. The platform had become essential infrastructure for digital product development, not optional software teams could easily replace. User retention numbers revealed the addiction factor. The $12 monthly professional tier showed incredible persistence because users literally couldn't live without collaborative features once they'd experienced them. Switching back to legacy tools felt like productivity suicide, slow, frustrating, and isolating. Network effects were accelerating rapidly. Each new user made the platform more valuable for existing users because collaboration requires participants. As more companies adopted Figma, it became harder for individual designers to use anything else. The software was creating its own gravitational pull through utility rather than vendor lock-in. Enterprise adoption happened organically rather than through traditional sales processes. Fortune 500 companies weren't buying Figma because of enterprise sales presentations. They were adopting it because their design teams demanded access to tools that actually improved productivity. User preference was driving purchasing decisions rather than procurement departments. The investment insight was hiding in plain sight for anyone paying attention. Users spending their own money on $12 subscriptions because the software genuinely improved their lives. Teams advocating for company-wide adoption because individual productivity gains were too valuable to give up. Entire professional communities standardizing on a platform because alternatives felt primitive by comparison. Wall Street analysts weren't embedded in design teams. They weren't experiencing daily frustrations that Figma solved or productivity improvements it delivered. They were analyzing market size estimates while missing the emotional connection that created genuine user loyalty, setting up dramatic undervaluation when millions of informed users could see essential value that traditional analysis missed completely. In 2021, the investment world finally began catching up to what users already knew. Figma's Series E round raised $200 million at a $10 billion valuation, a stunning 5x increase in just 1 year that reflected market recognition users had understood for years. This wasn't just another software company. The timing wasn't coincidental. Remote work had exploded during the pandemic, making collaborative software essential rather than convenient. Companies that had resisted cloud-based tools suddenly needed them desperately. Figma found itself perfectly positioned for a world where distributed teams required seamless digital collaboration. April 2021 brought another validation. FigJam, Figma's whiteboarding tool, proved the platform could extend beyond core design into broader collaboration. This wasn't feature creep. It was natural evolution of the collaborative philosophy that made Figma special. Teams already using Figma for design wanted similar tools for brainstorming, planning, and strategic discussions. Revenue acceleration told the real story. The company was building toward $749 million in annual revenue as more organizations discovered what users had been evangelizing for years. This wasn't traditional enterprise software sold through lengthy sales cycles. It was utility-driven adoption, where teams tried the product, loved the experience, then convinced their companies to pay for it. Market dominance was emerging organically. Figma achieved 80 to 90% market share in UI/UX design, not through aggressive sales tactics or exclusive contracts, but because users refused alternatives once they'd experienced collaborative design. The switching costs weren't financial, they were emotional and productivity-based. Adobe finally woke up to the existential threat. For decades, Adobe had dominated creative software through desktop applications, annual upgrade cycles, and professional market lock-in. Suddenly, a web-based startup was offering superior collaboration, cleaner interfaces, and more intuitive workflows. The philosophical clash was stark. Adobe's feature-heavy desktop approach versus Figma's clean, collaborative simplicity. User loyalty became Figma's most powerful competitive advantage. Switching costs weren't just about learning new software. People genuinely loved using Figma in ways they'd never loved Adobe products. The daily experience was so much better that teams would resist company-wide software standardization efforts if it meant giving up their preferred design tools. Adobe's response revealed how difficult it was for legacy companies to match new generation competitors. They tried adding collaborative features to existing desktop applications, but fundamental architecture limitations made real-time collaboration feel clunky and unreliable. Retrofitting collaboration into individual user software proved nearly impossible. Legacy code built for desktop applications, single-user architecture, and annual upgrade cycles couldn't match purpose-built collaborative platforms. Adobe's enterprise sales culture also conflicted with the user-driven adoption that made Figma successful. You can't sell collaborative software the same way you sell individual productivity tools. Network effects created an unbreachable moat. Collaboration requires participants, so as more companies adopted Figma, it became harder for individual designers to use anything else. The platform was generating its own gravitational pull through genuine utility rather than artificial barriers to switching. Market share erosion accelerated as companies switched not for specific features, but for overall user experience. Adobe's product comparisons might show feature parity on paper, but daily usability differences were enormous. Teams choosing Figma weren't making rational procurement decisions. They were choosing tools that made work more enjoyable and productive. Then came September 15th, 2022, and everything changed. Adobe announced a $20 billion acquisition offer for Figma, a massive bid that finally proved what informed users had known for years. The creative software giant was willing to pay $20 billion for something most people still didn't understand. User communities panicked immediately. They feared Adobe would ruin what they loved about clean, simple design tools. Adobe's history of complex, feature-heavy software seemed incompatible with Figma's utility-first philosophy. The acquisition felt like a threat to the collaborative design revolution that had transformed how creative work gets done. Adobe's $20 billion offer was staggering in its implications. Cash and stock for a company most people outside tech had never heard of. The creative software giant was essentially admitting that buying the competitive threat was easier than building collaborative capabilities from scratch. Industry reaction revealed how dramatically the business world had underestimated Figma's strategic importance. Analysts scrambled to understand what made design software worth more than many Fortune 500 companies. The acquisition offer forced mainstream business media to finally acknowledge that collaborative design had become essential infrastructure. Adobe's strategic logic was brutally honest, eliminating competition rather than competing. Building real-time collaborative design software from scratch would require years of development, fundamental architecture changes, and cultural transformation within Adobe's desktop-focused organization.
Still shareholders, of course, of Adobe, not too thrilled about today's news. However, to your point, Carl, earlier, it is kind of creating this sense of optimism potentially around the deal market. This is a $20 billion deal, the largest takeover of a private software company.
Buying Figma solved all these problems instantly, while removing the most dangerous competitive threat Adobe had ever faced. But the announcement triggered immediate panic in design communities worldwide. Users who had built their careers around Figma's clean, simple interface feared Adobe would complicate the software with unnecessary features, jack up prices, or simply kill innovation to protect legacy Creative Suite revenue. The acquisition felt like an existential threat to the collaborative design revolution. Regulatory scrutiny began almost immediately. The US Department of Justice, EU Commission, and UK regulators launched antitrust investigations focused on a crucial question. Would Adobe's acquisition eliminate the one company that truly prioritized user experience in creative software? Regulators recognized that Figma represented genuine competition in ways smaller design tools never had. The competition concern went deeper than market share statistics. Adobe had spent decades building complex, expensive software sold through traditional enterprise channels. Figma had proven that design software could be simple, collaborative, and user-friendly. Letting Adobe eliminate this alternative approach would reduce innovation and limit options for millions of creative professionals. Internal debate at Figma was intense. $20 billion would create life-changing wealth for employees who had joined a risky startup, but many team members had been attracted by the mission of building genuinely better software. not just creating acquisition targets. The decision represented a fundamental choice between financial success and preserving the user-focused culture that made Figma special. Dylan Field faced an impossible dilemma: personal wealth beyond imagination versus preserving the vision for collaborative design that had driven everything since Brown University. Accepting would validate the company's success, but potentially end the innovation users loved. Rejecting meant continued independence, but enormous pressure from investors and employees who wanted the financial reward. The lengthy review process created months of uncertainty. Employees wondered whether their mission-driven company would be absorbed into Adobe's corporate structure. Users anxiously waited to learn whether their preferred design tools would survive or be transformed beyond recognition. The entire design industry held its breath. December 18th, 2023 brought shocking news. Adobe and Figma mutually agreed to abandon the deal. Regulatory challenges had made completion uncertain, but both companies recognized that cultural integration might destroy what made Figma valuable in the first place. The $1 billion breakup fee became immediate validation of Figma's independence decision. Adobe paid $1 billion for the privilege of trying to acquire collaborative design capabilities they couldn't build internally. The termination fee boosted Figma's cash reserves dramatically while proving that some things are worth more than acquisition multiples. User communities celebrated immediately. Design professionals who had feared losing their preferred tools to Adobe's complexity suddenly had renewed hope that collaborative design innovation would continue. Social media filled with relief and excitement about Figma's continued independence. Financial impact was enormous beyond the breakup fee. The $1 billion termination payment, plus $415 million from a 2024 secondary sale, gave Figma unprecedented cash reserves for an independent software company. This financial strength enabled continued product development and competitive investment without venture capital pressure. But freedom from acquisition distraction created new challenges, proving they were worth more than $20 billion as an independent public company, while navigating Wall Street's traditional IPO system that historically favored institutional investors over the user communities who had driven their success. Fresh from rejecting Adobe's $20 billion offer, Figma faced a crucial decision in 2025: how to access public markets without getting played by the traditional IPO system. The choice would determine whether they could capture full value for their revolutionary software or leave billions on the table. The strategic debate within Figma's leadership centered on a fundamental question: traditional IPO versus direct listing. Each approach represented completely different philosophies about how companies should transition from private to public ownership, with enormous implications for Figma's future. Direct listings offered everything that aligned with Figma's collaborative values. No fixed price set by investment banks, shares open based on real market demand from actual buyers and sellers. No underwriter middlemen extracting fees while underpricing shares for their institutional clients. No allocation games that gave hedge funds millions of shares while retail investors got scraps. The Spotify precedent proved direct listings could work brilliantly. When Spotify went public in 2018, shares opened at $166, reflecting genuine market demand rather than Wall Street's artificial pricing. The music streaming company captured full value while providing fair access to retail investors who actually used and understood the product. Traditional IPOs are designed to transfer wealth from companies to investment banks and their institutional clients. Banks deliberately underprice shares to create first-day gains, ensuring deals succeed by making their clients money at the company's expense. This system dates back decades and prioritizes stability over value maximization for the actual company going public. The underwriter conflict of interest is blatant and legal. Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and other investment banks earn massive fees while giving cheap shares to institutional clients who flip them for guaranteed profits. The banks profit from underpricing, institutions profit from flipping, and companies lose billions in potential capital. Despite understanding these dynamics, Figma chose the traditional route. Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs were brought in as lead underwriters, immediately signaling that Wall Street's century-old playbook would determine pricing rather than market forces or user demand. Bill Gurley, the prominent venture capitalist, had warned about exactly this scenario. He predicted massive underpricing if Figma used traditional IPO methods, arguing that investment banks couldn't accurately value revolutionary software that most analysts didn't understand. His warnings proved remarkably prescient. The pricing process revealed how disconnected traditional finance was from user reality. Initial range of $25 to $28 per share, bumped to $33 during roadshows as institutional demand became apparent. But these prices reflected banker conservatism rather than genuine market assessment of collaborative design software's value. April 2025's S1 filing with the SEC revealed financial reality that justified much higher valuations. $821 million in trailing 12-month revenue, 46% year-over-year growth, 91% gross margins, and approaching profitability. These weren't startup metrics. They were the financial characteristics of essential business infrastructure. Internal projections at Figma showed executives understood demand would far exceed $33 pricing. The company had 13 million monthly active users, 95% Fortune 500 penetration, and passionate user communities eager to become shareholders. Anyone using Figma daily could predict enormous IPO demand. The risk calculation seemed reasonable. Traditional IPOs guaranteed raising $1 billion in capital versus uncertainty of direct listing success. Market conditions in 2025 included an IPO drought that made the traditional route appear safer for ensuring capital access. But what Figma missed was the opportunity cost of playing by Wall Street's rules. They could have aligned their public offering with collaborative company values by providing fairer retail access through direct listing methods. Instead, they chose a process that would exclude the user communities who had driven their success. The fundamental misalignment was philosophical. Figma had built success through user-first design and collaborative innovation. Traditional IPOs prioritize institutional relationships and banker convenience over user communities and fair market access. The contradiction would prove costly in multiple ways. July 31st, 2025 started like any other IPO day, but ended as one of the most dramatic examples of systematic underpricing in modern financial history. Figma's shares were priced at $33 the night before, a figure that would prove laughably conservative within hours. At 9:30 a.m. Eastern, shares immediately surged to $85, more than double the IPO price before most retail investors could even place orders. The demand was unprecedented and predictable for anyone who understood how essential Figma had become to digital product development worldwide. The revelation was stunning. Figma's IPO had been oversubscribed by more than 40 times. Investor interest wasn't just strong, it was overwhelming. Every major institution wanted shares, retail investors were desperate for access, and trading demand suggested the $33 pricing had missed true market value by an enormous margin. Peak madness came during regular trading hours as shares hit $116, representing a 250% increase above the IPO price. The stock was literally tripling in value as traders recognized they were buying shares in essential business infrastructure that had been priced like a speculative startup. Closing reality was sobering and infuriating. $115.50 per share, valuing Figma at $56 billion. The company that investors could have bought for $33 that morning was worth nearly 4 times that price. By market close. This wasn't normal IPO appreciation. It was systematic mispricing on an industrial scale. The devastating math was simple and brutal. Figma raised $1.2 billion at $33 per share, but could have raised $3 to $4 billion if priced at the closing value. That extra $2 to $3 billion represented funding for AI expansion, strategic acquisitions, international growth, employee retention, and competitive investment capital that instead went to institutional flippers as guaranteed profits. Bill Gurley's vindication was immediate and complete. His prediction of enormous mispricing came true in real time, as trading data proved traditional finance had systematically undervalued revolutionary software. The venture capitalists' warnings about IPO underpricing were no longer theoretical. They were measurable in billions of dollars. What did the extra billions mean practically? Figma was transitioning from design software to comprehensive AI-powered collaborative platform. Additional capital could have accelerated development, funded acquisitions of complementary technologies, supported international expansion, and provided resources for competing with tech giants building rival platforms. The underwriter windfall was obscene and predictable. Morgan Stanley's institutional clients received millions of shares at $33, then immediately flipped them for 80+ profits per share. These guaranteed gains represented wealth transfer from Figma to Wall Street middlemen who added no value beyond manipulating price discovery. Retail investor fury exploded across social media as ordinary people realized they'd been systematically excluded from obvious investment opportunities. The IPO allocation process had given institutions guaranteed profits while locking out individual investors who actually used and understood Figma's value. The allocation scandal revealed systematic bias in supposedly fair distribution. Robinhood users who requested 300 shares received exactly one each, while hedge funds received millions. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Informed retail investors getting scraps, while uninformed institutions got guaranteed profits. Social media exploded with complaints about legalized front-running, as users shared screenshots of minimal allocations versus massive institutional distributions. The phrase, "one bloody share," trended as retail investors expressed frustration with systematic exclusion from companies they actually understood. FTC Chair Lina Khan's irony was palpable and depressing. She had successfully blocked Adobe's $20 billion acquisition to preserve value and competition, only to watch Wall Street extract $3 billion through systematic underpricing. Regulatory success in antitrust was undermined by legalized IPO manipulation. Dylan Field faced an impossible emotional situation, celebrating the successful IPO and enormous company valuation, while knowing they'd been massively undervalued by the traditional system they'd chosen to use. The success felt hollow when billions of potential capital had been transferred to institutional speculation rather than company growth. The promise had seemed reasonable. Robinhood's IPO access feature would democratize investing by giving retail traders opportunities to buy shares at IPO prices before public trading began. For Figma's offering, this meant ordinary investors could potentially participate in what many recognized as essential business software finally going public. But reality delivered a crushing lesson about whose interests IPO allocations actually serve. Robinhood received approximately 250,000 shares to distribute among hundreds of thousands of eager users who understood Figma's value better than most institutional investors ever would. The crushing disappointment was mathematical and predictable. Users requesting 300 shares, a reasonable position for individual investors who recognized Figma's potential, received exactly one share each. The randomized allocation process meant that informed retail investors got token access, while institutional clients received millions of shares. The math of frustration was simple and infuriating. One share purchased at $33 and sold at closing price yielded $82 profit, decent for a single share. But users had requested full positions expecting meaningful participation. The potential gain from 300 shares would have been $24,600, representing significant wealth creation for for individual investors. Social media meltdown was immediate and justified. Reddit forums and Twitter feeds exploded with Robinhood user complaints, sharing screenshots of minimal allocations. Users who had specifically researched Figma, understood its market position, and requested substantial positions felt systematically excluded from profits they had helped create through product usage and market knowledge. The memes and rage centered around one bloody share, becoming a symbol of retail investor treatment in supposedly democratized markets. Users joked bitterly about receiving participation trophy allocations, while institutions received meaningful positions in companies they actually understood and used daily. Historical context made the frustration worse. The 2021 GameStop restrictions had already damaged trust between Robinhood and retail investors who felt the platform prioritized institutional relationships over user interests. The Figma allocation disaster reinforced narratives about rigged systems that favored Wall Street over Main Street. Institutional favoritism was obvious and legal. Hedge funds and wealth management clients received millions of shares at IPO pricing, enabling massive profits from systematic underpricing. The allocation system was working exactly as designed to benefit institutional relationships rather than informed retail participation. Morgan Stanley's priorities were clear from allocation patterns. Even the investment bank's private wealth clients received zero allocations, highlighting how retail investors ranked below institutional clients regardless of their knowledge or investment interest. Individual investors were systematically deprioritized at every level. The flip opportunity was immediate and profitable for institutions. Large allocations at $33 could be sold immediately at $80 plus per share, generating guaranteed profits with no market risk. This wealth transfer from companies to institutions is the intended outcome of traditional IPO underpricing. User accusations reflected genuine understanding of systematic bias. Terms like bait and switch, exit liquidity for Wall Street, and TradFi manipulation captured retail investors' recognition that they were being used to create demand, while institutions captured profits. Robinhood's defense emphasized the random allocation process and overwhelming oversubscription as factors beyond their control. The platform had received limited shares from underwriters and distributed them according to stated policies, but users felt misled about realistic allocation expectations. The policy restrictions added insult to injury. Robinhood threatened 30-day IPO bans for users who sold allocated shares quickly, effectively discouraging retail flipping, while institutions faced no similar restrictions on immediate profit-taking. The double standard was obvious and infuriating. What this revealed about democratized platforms was uncomfortable but important. Even brokers marketed as retail-friendly ultimately serve institutional interests first when allocation decisions are made. Democratization rhetoric couldn't overcome systematic bias in favor of large clients and traditional relationships. The irony was thick and painful. A company built on collaborative design and democratizing creative tools had chosen a public offering process that systematically excluded the collaborative user communities who had driven their success. Figma's values and IPO process were fundamentally misaligned. Today, trading around $97 after settling from IPO volatility, Figma represents something unprecedented, a $50 billion company most consumers have never heard of, yet one that quietly powers virtually every digital product they use daily. Approaching $1 billion annual revenue with 91% gross margins, 13 million monthly users, and 95% Fortune 500 adoption. This is profitable business built on solving genuine problems for millions of professionals worldwide. What the IPO taught was expensive but valuable. Even successful companies get played by Wall Street's system prioritizing institutional profits over company value. Direct listing could have captured an extra $2 to $3 billion while providing fairer retail access. The cash fortress of $1.5 billion from IPO proceeds and breakup fees enables aggressive AI investment, but billions were still left on the table for institutional extraction. The investment lesson is clear. Look for tools that professionals use daily and genuinely love. Serving markets traditional analysis underestimates. Your competitive advantage might be hiding in whatever professional area you understand deeply. Software and services that users love, but markets haven't fully recognized. The most valuable investments often hide in plain sight, in tools you already know and love, but most investors haven't discovered yet. Right, well, there you have it. 2 university dropouts built a $50 billion empire most people still can't explain to their families. The next revolutionary company might already be on your computer screen, quietly making your work better whilst the world remains oblivious. Keep your eyes open for the next Figma, because by the time it hits headlines, all the real money will be in someone else's pocket. You'll want to stick around for more stories of these companies that'll have you wondering where we've all gone wrong with our lives. Bah, humbug.